Welcome to Mind, Muscle, and Metabolism, the Jade Teta podcast. Here you get the in-depth science and practical tools needed to change your body, optimize your health, and elevate your mindset. I'm Dr. Jade Teta, and here is what I want you to know. You are different. You are as unique on the inside chemically as you are on the outside physically. And those differences matter. They matter because there is only one rule to achieving optimal health, fitness, and body change. That rule: do what works for you. My goal is to help you understand exactly how. I'm so excited you're here. Your transformation starts right now. Okay, everybody, welcome to today's podcast. This is a Q&A podcast. This is where I'm taking questions from individuals who are patrons of the Jade Teta podcast. They're able to submit their questions, and I go through them live. These podcasts get a lot of listens just because I think people like to listen into questions. They oftentimes learn a lot about themselves. And so these can go a little bit long. Typically, I go about an hour, and I'm just going to jump into this really quickly. So first question here is, hey, Jade, I was wondering if you could cover a comparison between using whey protein powder versus branched-chain amino acids for upping protein levels to build muscle. Branched-chain amino acids are cheaper and less calories, so I'm thinking that's the way to go. Not only, hang on one second, let me just see. I'm thinking that's the way to go, not only for pre-workout, but for a shot of protein every couple hours inside my eating window. Okay, so this is a question about basically amino acid intake versus regular protein intake, and specifically the branched chain amino acids. So these would be leucine, isoleucine, and valine. The branched chain amino acids are an interesting category of amino acids, and so let me go through that really quickly, and then we'll sort of cover this here in just a minute. And one of the things we need to understand is nutrition is all about context, right? So this individual is saying taking branched chain amino acids in lieu of whey protein to build muscle. And so first of all, let's go through branched chain amino acids, then we'll talk a little bit about whey protein, and then we'll go from there to answer the question of which of these should you be taking to build muscle. So branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. These are really, really interesting compounds because amino acids can act as building blocks for protein, obviously. Most people know that. But what they don't know is they can also act as signaling molecules, meaning that they can almost act hormone-like in nature, adjusting certain signaling elements in the body. For example, mTOR, which is a signaling molecule that is involved in muscle protein synthesis, anabolism or building up of muscle, and also slowing the breakdown of muscle. This is impacted by the branched chain amino acids, primarily leucine. So leucine is one of these amino acids that can trigger mTOR and increase muscle protein synthesis and decrease muscle protein breakdown. And so that's a very interesting and useful thing for the body. And this is why leucine has gotten a lot of press, and a lot of times people talk about branched chain amino acids. I've talked about branched chain amino acids for weight loss specifically, partly because back, some 10 years ago, I read a few animal studies showing that mTOR in the brain, mTOR is in the muscle, it's also in the brain, and mTOR in the brain has to do with hunger. And branched chain amino acids, specifically leucine, and some of these animal studies I was reading shut down hunger. And so I started using them clinically with very good success in dieters where I didn't want to add a lot of calories, but I wanted some hunger suppression. And by the way, branched chain amino acids, if you taste them, are very bitter, and bitter compounds are known to release an incretin hormone called GLP-1 that is involved in hunger suppression as well. So there might be two separate mechanisms there for branched-chain amino acids and hunger. And this is something that's very controversial. You won't see in the research studies on, that I'm aware of anyway, studies on using branched-chain amino acids to shut down hunger and cravings. However, I've seen it be very successful clinically. But we wouldn't know if it works for sure until we do a study on it. So the other thing about branched-chain amino acids in dieting, weight loss, and we're talking about that here for a minute, but we're going to talk about building muscle as well, is that branched-chain amino acids are easily converted into other amino acids. They are gluconeogenic, meaning they can be used to make glucose when the body is low in glucose, and they are ketogenic, meaning they can be used to make ketones as well. And so they're an interesting category of amino acids in that they can be used by the body for different energy pathways, which is another useful thing about branched-chain amino acids. And so one of the things that is kind of controversial is the ratio of these things, and they're each a little bit different. Most of the research has been done on leucine and its ability to impact mTOR. Isoleucine has been shown to increase insulin sensitivity, which is a very beneficial thing. And there's not much on valine, but it certainly plays a role in these gluconeogenic and ketogenic categories that we just talked about. And so there's a lot that branched-chain amino acids do, and they're very popular in the bodybuilding world for a long period of time, being taken pre-workout, post-workout. There's plenty of research showing that there might be a performance-enhancing benefit to some of the branched-chain amino acids, which makes sense given that they are energy ability for them to impact these energy pathways we just talked about. And the research suggests that there might be an optimal ratio in tissues. Human tissues, the ratio is typically 2-1-1, leucine, isoleucine to valine. And so the question here is someone asking about, should I use whey protein or branched-chain amino acids in lieu of whey protein? Now, the other thing that you need to understand about this is that whey protein in and of itself, part of the reason that whey protein might be so beneficial is that it is very high in the branched-chain amino acids. In fact, and I'll quote this, some of you can check me on this, but I believe there's about 2 grams of leucine per 30 grams of whey protein. So about 26% leucine in whey protein, which is a pretty high amount. And the other thing is that when you're trying to build muscle, you need calories, right? You need calories. So obviously, if you go branched-chain amino acids, they do have calories because it is an amino acid, right? But it is not going to have as much, let's say 2 grams of leucine compared to 30 grams of whey protein. That's going to be far less calories, right? So that's what we're doing here. But the idea, if you want to build muscle, just as you need a calorie deficit to lose fat or lose weight, you need a calorie surplus to gain muscle. And so one of the things that I would caution against, and a lot of people get lost in the biochemistry of this, is really not this complicated. Really what you want is calories first. You want to make sure you have enough calorie surplus from any macronutrient, carbohydrate, fat, protein, to build muscle. You need a calorie surplus. Otherwise, where is the body going to get the extra energy to lay down extra tissue? And so you would not be able to build muscle if you're in a calorie deficit, no matter what percent of leucine, isoleucine, or valine you're taking in. So calories come first, protein comes second, and amino acids would come third in that hierarchy of building muscle. So first, I would say you need to make sure you have adequate calorie intake so that your body has a surplus, so that your body can build muscle. Now remember, just because you have a surplus of calories does not mean you're gaining fat. You can also be instead gaining muscle. And that's exactly what happens when you have a calorie surplus, slight calorie surplus, and you're doing heavy weight training. So branched-chain amino acids, if you're just sitting on the couch and you're taking in branched-chain amino acids, they may keep you from losing some muscle, but they're certainly not going to help you gain. You need extra calories. You need a muscle stimulus, the strain of, this sort of mechanical strain and work that the muscle has to do. And then something like branched-chain amino acids can be beneficial in that. And so what I would say is, in the hierarchy of this, I would say calories come first. And by the way, one of the things that we also need to understand that's not really understood is that carbohydrates, because they stimulate insulin, protein does too, and protein can stimulate insulin as much as carbohydrates, but carbohydrates typically give you a much more insulinogenic response, and insulin is arguably the most anabolic hormone in the body. Without insulin, you can't build muscle. And so actually one of the most important macronutrients for muscle building is carbohydrates, not protein. So again, you want calories from any macronutrient. You need an excess calorie to build muscle. And then you want to make sure you have enough carbohydrate and insulin stimulation. And then you can get into, sort of the whey protein and branched-chain amino acids. Now, whey protein, because of the branched-chain amino acids, is insulin stimulating. So branched-chain amino acids are interesting because they definitely stimulate insulin, but one of them has been shown to increase insulin sensitivity. And so that could be a very good thing, right? High insulin levels, but your tissues being sensitive to insulin, which means you're driving amino acids and glucose into the muscle cells rather than it sitting out in your blood and doing damage. And so if I was going to answer this question, and hopefully you don't mind me being very thorough with this, but if I was going to answer this question, I would say whey protein is probably the better bet here, because you are going to be able to get the calories from whey protein, and you get a lot of other amino acids in addition to the branched-chain amino acids. They're not the only things that help build muscle, and you're going to require all of the amino acids, which whey protein is a very good source of all of them. So I would say whey protein is probably better than branched-chain amino acids from this perspective. Now, if we were talking weight loss, I might say, yeah, branched-chain amino acids can be very useful in this regard because they provide less calories, they have a muscle-sparing effect, and there is some research that shows they may enhance fat loss on diets. Certainly, they enhance maintaining muscle. So that would be my take on the branched-chain amino acids. If you're going to get branched-chain amino acids, typically you're going to want a 2-1-1 ratio. You'll find different ratios with higher amounts of leucine. You'll see 2-1-1 ratio, leucine to isoleucine to valine. You'll see 4-1-1. You'll see 8-1-1. You'll see 12-1-1. And just for people listening here, the idea behind this is the higher amount of leucine, the more mTOR signaling you get, and perhaps the better effect on muscle sparing and muscle protein synthesis. Muscle protein synthesis is just sort of the way that we look at it's one of the chief elements in gaining muscle. But obviously, again, you need the hormonal stimulus like from insulin. You need the extra calories, and those are going to be more important from my perspective. So hopefully that makes sense. Certainly, if you want to add the extra branched-chain amino acids, you certainly can, but do so in the context of enough calories and a stimulus that is adequate in terms of lifting weights and making the muscles do the work necessary to grow. So hopefully that makes sense there. All right, let's go into the next question here. Hey, Jade, I've done metabolic renewal 2 or 3 times and metabolic prime 2 or 3 times. Someone on the Facebook group asked the question about changing the cycles. I'm sure the 3 weeks builds your body for the next level, but thought it was an interesting idea. Okay, so here's an interesting thing here. For those of you who don't know, I have several best-selling workout programs, and they're really workout programs and diet programs. The first one I did was Metabolic Aftershock. Then I did a follow-up to that, which was Level 2, Metabolic Prime. Then I did one specifically for women, which is Metabolic Renewal. And these are 8 to 12-week programs that are really a full-on guided workout. So you get 12 weeks worth of workouts with these programs. And this particular woman has said she's done Metabolic Renewal 2 or 3 times. She's done Metabolic Prime 2 or 3 times. And I believe she's asking about the different cycles, because in each of these workouts, and in a good workout program design anyway, you don't just want to throw things in. You sort of want to have different phases. getting you ready for the work to be done. So in a 12-week, let's say, workout cycle, what you would be doing if you're programming a workout is you would lead people in to this kind of slowly. So you wouldn't get super intense in the beginning, and you'd be setting the framework to get stronger. So typically, it's all about developing coordination and muscle strength in the first phases, and then we get in the later phases, in phase 3 and 4, that's when we get into some serious metabolic conditioning, some very high intensity interval work and stuff like that. So in this particular case, if someone who's seasoned and done all of these, she's essentially asking, I think, can she pick and choose which phases and which workouts to do? And that is absolutely something that you can do once you develop a base and are more advanced in workouts. So what I would say is if you're a beginner, that would not be the thing that you'd want to do. You'd want to follow phase 1, then go into phase 2, then phase 3, then phase 4, and then sort of repeat that, getting more intense. But if you're someone like myself who's been doing this for 20-some years, 25 years, 30 years, you are a seasoned weightlifter, then yes, you can pretty much jump around and do these as you see fit. And just for those of you who are listening who are doing metabolic aftershock, renewal, or prime, typically these are built in a way to allow you to repeat them 3 or 4 times. So you can use these particular programs up to a year. So you go through the first time, second time, third time, fourth time. Then after that, after a year, you may want to sort of go to the next level. So if you start with metabolic aftershock, which for beginners, that would be the one I would start with. You could do that up to 4 times, really get, bang for your buck and your money's worth. Then you would go into metabolic prime. And metabolic renewal, you can start at any time, because it's female specific in that regard. But hopefully that gets your question right. I hope I answered it the way you were asking it. So let's see. All right. Okay, got that one already. Let's go to the next one. All right, can you please discuss the reasons why dairy products get a bad reputation? Why are so many diets anti-dairy? Okay, well, this is a really good question, and I'm glad this question is being asked. So let's look at this for a minute. What is wrong with dairy foods? Let's describe what do we mean by dairy foods. Oftentimes, eggs are lumped into dairy, but dairy really means something that comes from a cow. So what we're really talking about here is we're talking about cow-based products, right? We're talking about the milk from cows. We're talking about milk. We're talking about cream. We're talking about yogurts. We're talking about those kinds of things. We're talking about cheeses. And this has been a part of our diet for some time, certainly for the last 8,000 years or so, maybe even sooner. But when you look at evolutionary biology and evolutionary nutrition, you'll know that we have been on the planet in our current state, modern-day Homo sapiens, for about 1.2 million years. So 10,000 years is sort of a blip in time. And so one of the arguments is that our systems are not necessarily adept or adapted to dairy foods. And you'll see this mainly in people in the Middle Eastern realm and in the African countries where essentially many of them will be lactose intolerant and they know that they can't handle dairy. But most Europeans do very well on dairy and have incorporated dairy for some time. One of the things about us humans is we are amazing at our ability to take advantage of multiple food resources, and we certainly did with dairy. And so one of the reasons that dairy sometimes gets a bad rap is because some people lack the enzyme lactase, which breaks down the dairy sugar lactose. And that can cause diarrhea and loose stools and all kinds of digestive disturbances. So most people who have lactose intolerance know that dairy doesn't do well with them. And that's an easy to solve because you can take lactase as an enzyme when you drink milk and it breaks down the sugar. So that lactose has to do with the sugar. However, dairy foods also have different protein components that people can be sensitive to or allergic to. Now, a true food allergy is a food like when you eat peanuts and you break out in a rash, or you get anaphylaxis and you can't breathe and you have to take an EpiPen or something like that. So food allergies, and some people will react to dairy like that, but mainly some of these proteins you can be sensitive to. And when we talk about food sensitivities, these are known as delayed sensitivity reactions. And so those of you who pay attention, there are two types of sort of allergic reactions. One is an IgE reaction, which is these sort of serious anaphylactic reactions where you eat a food and you immediately get a reaction. Maybe you get hives, maybe you get itchy throat, itchy eyes, you're unable to breathe. You eat, fish, you see that with shrimp sometimes, those kinds of things. Those are IgE immediate reactions. Well, we also have IgG, immunoglobulin IgG reactions that are known as delayed sensitivity reactions. So here you might have dairy and then notice some loose stools maybe a couple days later, maybe get a runny nose a couple hours later, and they're minor types of things. And so some people in the functional medicine world will, especially casein, the protein casein, which is different than the sugar lactose. We're talking about a sugar, lactose, and lactase deficiency versus the different protein components of dairy foods, which would be whey and casein. So when you think about curds and whey, curds would be sort of the casein component. Whey is the other component. Whey is a little less allergenic than casein typically. And so casein can cause some of these delayed sensitivity reactions in some people. And so some people in the functional medicine world, when they're dealing with sick individuals who have autoimmune conditions and things like that, will want to remove food sensitivities, common food sensitivities, and dairy will certainly be one of them. So those are two reasons why dairy foods can get a bad rap. Part of the other reason dairy foods have historically gotten a bad rap, especially in their natural state, is that dairy foods are typically rich in fat. When you milk a cow, you obviously get the milk portion and the cream portion, and so this is a very fatty, calorie-rich sort of product that the cow is producing to feed their baby calves. And so one of the things that can happen is it can be a very calorie-rich food. So sort of early on when we thought fat was the big deal and that fat was causing everyone to get fat and fat was causing heart disease, dairy foods got a bad rap then, and we moved to sort of these dairy foods that were lower in fat. And that's why you had back, when I was growing up, we did skim milk and 2% milk versus whole milk and then half and half and cream. And so we have all of these things here. And so obviously cheese, dairy products, things like that can be high in calories. And they also, as a protein food, because they sort of have this mixture of fat and sugar and protein, anytime you have a meal or a combination of macronutrients like that, you can get a lot of calories, and you also get a pretty big insulin response. And so this is another thing that in the carbohydrate, insulin-centered dietary dogma, many people will say, well, yeah, avoid carbohydrates, but also you might want to avoid dairy because they can be very insulin-producing as well. Certainly the paleo diet, Paleolithic ancestor diet is not a diet that would have had dairy in it as well. So these are all the considerations of why dairy gets a bad rap. But what does sort of the research actually say on this? Well, it's interesting because people who consume dairy foods tend to have lower rates of diabetes, tend to have less binge eating behaviors and things like that. And so dairy foods, especially when they are consumed as part of a balanced vegetable-rich, protein-rich diet, seem to be pretty beneficial. And we also have some little-known factors that I'll discuss that not a lot of people will be aware of, but they're fun to sort of understand. Cheese in particular, because of the way it is fermented, especially things like blue cheese and things like that. By the way, this is cheeses and things like that. We developed penicillin from this. So blue cheese has some antimicrobial aspects to it, and some research suggests that cheeses can be very beneficial to the microbiome or our gut bugs. Certain types of cheeses, especially blue cheese, can actually have beneficial effects for our microbiome, which is all the rage right now in the research trying to understand gut bugs and gut function. Whey protein, which is, again, the curds in the whey. The whey is the lower fat sort of if you ever looked at cottage cheese and you see the wet portion, that would be the whey portion, has been studied tremendously, from everything from performance enhancement to hunger suppression to diabetes risk reduction to increasing glutathione levels, which is the number one antioxidant in the human body. And there are so many good quality research things around certain dairy foods, especially whey protein. So if you're asking me, most people who listen to me know that I'm really an advocate for understanding your own body. You know your body better than I do. You know it better than a research study knows your body. You know it better than your guru that you're reading or the book that you're reading. And you will have to determine whether or not dairy foods serve you or not. And the way you typically would know, just at a very high level, is that when you eat dairy foods, as a result of eating those foods, are you less likely to overeat and end up at the end of the day with calorie surplus? Or are you more likely to end up with calorie surplus? Many people who are including dairy foods, especially foods like whey protein powders and things like that, tend to do very well. And it's one of the reasons why protein powder supplements, meal replacements and protein powder supplements that contain whey protein from dairy are in the research are shown to be amazing at being able to help us up our protein intake, suppress our hunger and cravings, and more easily achieve calorie deficits than we could without it. Not to mention, dairy is one of these foods that, in lieu of adding salt and things like that, dairy can, especially cheeses and things like that, can make us more likely to eat salads and other vegetables. For example, we all know the example of adding cheddar cheese to broccoli so that children will get the roughage in, because the cheddar cheese adds flavor, adds, sort of this satiety type effect on there. And what has been shown in research is that even that kind of thing, even when you're adding cheeses and things like that to vegetables for kids, eventually that exposure, they'll end up be more likely to like broccoli without cheese later. So these are all the reasons dairy sort of gets a bad rap. I'm not anti-dairy at all. I'm only anti-dairy if the person is someone who can't tolerate dairy. Some instances where I may consider taking dairy out of someone's diet is if they are dealing with an autoimmune condition like Hashimoto's thyroiditis or any sort of autoimmune condition, or if I ran an IgG food sensitivity panel and saw dairy being, very high up on the list of something that they might be reactive to, or if I did a food, sort of diary and saw that most of their calories were coming from dairy foods and things like that. But typically dairy is not something that I think is a bad thing. In fact, I think for most people, dairy is probably going to be a very healthy thing to do. It's high in protein. You can certainly get low-fat dairy foods. One of my favorites personally is mozzarella. So part skim mozzarella, caprese salads, when I was in Italy, just eating those things nonstop, a slice of, nice mozzarella slice on a tomato with basil and balsamic vinaigrette and olive oil is amazing, low calorie, high protein, hunger suppressing. And I was getting very low calorie diets in Italy and feeling very satisfied. And so use dairy to your advantage unless you have some other reason to get rid of it. So hopefully that walks you through many of the reasons why certain dietary dogmas and people will be anti-dairy. All right, let's get into the next question. Hey, Jade, I feel like the only thing I struggle with is appetite and potential food sensitivities, not allergies, but what is the best way to determine this? Okay, so this is an interesting question to get after the question I just answered. Hopefully I explained to you sort of what is true food allergy versus food sensitivity. So true food allergy is an IgE reaction, sort of this immediate reaction. And the lines get blurred here depending on who you're talking to. Functional medicine doctors would speak of allergies as both IgE and IgG. Some MDs will as well. But, usually when we say food sensitivities, we're talking about these delayed reactions that are not true allergies maybe versus allergies that are, immediate and, extremely reactive. But this person is saying that they struggle with appetite and potential food sensitivities. But what is the best way to determine this? So I guess what they're asking here, if I'm understanding this correctly, is am I hungry because I have food sensitivities, and or is it due to something else? And typically, what I would say to that is, food sensitivities are not, necessarily going to make you hungry. There's this idea that people say, oh, if you're having cravings and things like that, it must be because you're missing some nutrient in your diet. And there's absolutely no research or any sort of objective information we have that is true. For example, some people might say, oh, you're craving chocolate and you're eating a lot of chocolate because chocolate's rich in magnesium, and that must mean you need magnesium. But people don't crave cocoa powder, which is bitter and doesn't have a sweet flavor. They crave chocolate bars and things like that. So it's not that they're craving magnesium from that. Magnesium is very rich in broccoli and green leafy vegetables too. Why is it that we always crave these highly palatable foods? If it was really about, getting nutrients, we would see people craving very nutrient-dense foods like vegetables and things like that, which they rarely, if ever, do. So this idea that people are craving foods because they are missing some nutrient probably isn't true, and nor is it probably not true. And I say probably because I don't know completely, but it doesn't make sense. We have no objective data to tell us this, that food sensitivities are triggering, sort of these appetite changes. One of the things that is likely going on, that is new research that we know, and actually it's highlighted in a great book by Stephen Guyenet, who wrote a book called The Hungry Brain for the layperson, if you want to read all about this, talks about the idea, and I've been talking about this for some time because I was seeing it in animal studies, and now we're starting to see it in potential human studies, the idea of the cafeteria diet, which you might say, well, Jade, what's the cafeteria diet? This is what they call the human diet that they feed to rats, that is a mix of high fat, high starch, high sugar, high salt, these highly palatable, hedonistic food combinations that sort of ping the pleasure centers in the brain and cause us to want to eat more. We started seeing some of this back in the 60s when we were talking about people being fed very bland, texture neutral sort of slurries that they would sip out of these, big thermoses. And what was shown is when you eat a very bland diet, a lot of these pleasure centers and these hedonistic centers and these pinging centers in the brain that make you seek out highly palatable foods get turned down to some degree, and that's why a very bland diet can be beneficial. This is why, the Asians, they eat rice, but they don't put a bunch of salt and fat on it. They eat it plain and steamed, and it's very bland. Same thing with a potato. Potato has been shown to be one of the most hunger-suppressing foods there is, but we use the potato as a palate for salt and fat, and that's a whole different thing when French fries hit your tongue versus a plain baked potato hits your tongue. And so French fries make you want to eat more and more and more. Potato chips make you want to eat more and more and more, but a regular steamed baked potato or regular steamed rice and a baked potato can be very satisfying because it's bland. And so I wouldn't necessarily think that the issue you're having has to do with food sensitivities, but I would be looking at this palatability argument where hot foods high in fat, sugar, starch can trigger sort of cravings. By the way, everyone listening to this knows what this is like. If you've ever been on a, quote, diet where you've been eating, quote, clean, which I don't really like the term clean because what does that mean? But typically what it means is a diet that's mostly vegetables and lean protein and not a lot of sauces and not a lot of stuff like that. You'll notice that you have, sort of this shutdown in the brain where after a few days, the few days in the beginning where it's kind of hard, it gets easier and then hunger is lowered a little bit. But if you do a cheat meal maybe on the weekend to reward yourself for a clean week of eating and you have pizza, that cheat meal can turn into a cheat weekend or a cheat week or a whole cheat month. It can set you off the rails, and some people are more susceptible to this than others. And so if you want to control appetite, I wouldn't necessarily be thinking of particular food sensitivities. I'd be thinking of the foods that we know through research for most people do a really good job at shutting down hunger. Protein, fiber, water, foods. These would be soups, salads, scrambles, and shakes. So people have heard me say this a lot: soup, salad, scrambles, and shakes. Soup, salad, scrambles, and shakes. These are foods that, if you leave off the starch and the fat, are very protein, fiber, vegetables, and water rich, without a lot of salt, without a lot of sugar, without a lot of starch, without a lot of fat, and those combinations. And so those are the foods that you want to eat if you want to maximize appetite suppression: soups, salads, scrambles, and shakes. And also try to keep your diet relatively bland. You might be one of these people who's getting pinged by these highly palatable foods. So that's more likely what's going on here. So hopefully that is useful for you. Let's see. Next question. Could you talk a bit about intermittent fasting, especially as it pertains to women and hormonal functions? There seems to be a lot of conflicting opinion out there as to whether it's completely beneficial and safe, enhances cognitive function, and promotes weight management, or will wreck your hormones, cause amenorrhea and weight rebounding due to stress, and generally just backfire. Certainly it's an individual experience, but what is the real science? Well, the real science is we have both anthropological data, historical data, and modern day science that tells us fasting is very, very beneficial in multiple ways. And this includes intermittent fasting, or also known as time-restricted feeding, where you maybe skip breakfast and only eat your meal in an 8-hour window between 12 p.m. and 8 p.m. This is true of alternate day fasting, where one day you eat and one day you don't. The warrior diet, the 20-day fast. Like, there's all kinds of fasts and even longer fast. But the question here is, is the science there, and is this beneficial? Yes, no question about it. Not only that, evolutionarily speaking, we humans are built for fasting. In our modern day construct of food, the idea that we're supposed to eat 3 meals per day is ludicrous. That is a modern day construct. Hunter-gatherers typically, especially if you study modern day hunter-gatherers, typically eat one big meal at the end of the day. They might graze a little bit in the morning with some leftover fruits and things like that, but typically they go all day and then have one big meal at the end of the day. And so they're doing this 20-hour fast typically, and they would, even in, sort of natural settings, you would not know when your next meal is coming. So you might be without food for 4 days, 5 days, 6 days. And there are benefits from this for the metabolism. The problem with it is twofold. One, we no longer live in a world where food is scarce. Matter of fact, there's food on every corner. And so because we evolved in a world where food was scarce, we are always seeking out food. And any opportunity to eat food, we will take it. And so many, many people start out with an intention of fasting and realize that they simply cannot overcome the biological urges of hunger, cravings, and energy fluctuations, and they end up binging. So back in the old days, in historical times, there's no way you could consume 2,000 to 4,000 calories in one meal. These hunter-gatherers cannot do that, but we certainly can. Anyone who's been to the Cheesecake Factory knows that you can consume 2,000 or 3,000 calories in one sitting, and many people will do that. And so you have to ask yourself, if I fast and try to fast, am I more or less likely to end up binging later? Am I one of these people who will go all day without food, then get home at 5 and then eat from 5 o'clock to 11 o'clock and consume 4,000 or 5,000 calories in that sitting as a result of fasting? Some people simply do better with more frequent eating to control that. However, if we could force everyone to fast and not have that backfire effect, it probably would be highly beneficial. But we just live in a reality where food is everywhere and most people cannot do it. Now, you asked about women in particular, and I oftentimes talk about this, and I do get some flack about this. Some people will argue this fact, but the female metabolism is, from my understanding of the research and my clinical experience, is a little bit more sensitive to stress than men. There's a more stress-sensitive barometer in women, and that makes sense because women are the child-bearing gender. And so some of these things I have seen clinically, like fasting, can backfire on women more quickly than they do for men. But the idea that fasting is going to cause amenorrhea and cause your hormones to go out of whack and all of this on every single woman that does it is absolutely not true and kind of ludicrous. In fact, women will benefit from fasting just as much as a man will, so long as they can do it. But in the modern day, think about it, right? If you're going to do a fast, you don't want to be fasting and then being sleep deprived at the same time, and then working out like crazy, and then running here and there, and then being stressed with the kids and being stressed with work and all that kind of stuff, and then be trying to fast. The metabolism is a stress barometer, and certainly going without food can be stressful to the metabolism if you also put all this other loaded stuff on top of you. And so when you fast, I would say pair eating with training and pair fasting with relaxing. This is one way to make it work for a woman, but absolutely, not only would I say if you can fast, it will be beneficial for most, both men and women, but fasting the right way will usually help women, like women with PCOS, women who have hormonal abnormalities, to restore some of their hormonal function. It's just that the modern day stress that we already have, and then adding fasting on top of that, can be an issue. And you have to understand that you are unique. So it doesn't matter what a study says. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what your favorite guru says. It doesn't matter what book you read on intermittent fasting. Does it work for you? Now, how do you know if it works for you? If you fast, if you skip breakfast, are you likely to end up at the end of that day with a calorie reduction and more stable energy and feeling more vital? Or are you likely to end up with the reverse? That's how you know if it's going to work for you. And so absolutely be a metabolic detective, try it out, but certainly don't buy into the hype that just because you're a woman, this is going to wreck your hormones and cause amenorrhea and all this kind of stuff. That is absolutely not true. That might be the case with some women. Usually those women would already be women who are overly stressed, over-exercised, already doing way too much, and or just cannot overcome the biological urges that kick in for many people when they fast. So hopefully that is helpful for you. All right, let's see. Next question. Since women produce a higher level of growth hormone than men and would obviously get a greater spike during weightlifting, does that increase in growth hormone result in greater anti-aging effects as well? And about anti-aging, I mean better overall hormonal balance that would be possibly decrease a woman's risk for cancer. I know many cancers are hormonally related, so even though we know that as a whole men don't have the hormone swings as a result of aging as women do, as in how women can develop estrogen-based breast cancers, etc., does having a higher level of growth hormone help us or give us an advantage via weightlifting as it relates to growth hormone and a possibly lower risk of certain cancers? Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. So this person is talking about the idea, I talk about this in the Metabolic Renewal Program, which is a specific program for women. And one of the things I talk about in there is that there is some indication that women have an advantage as it pertains to human growth hormone. Men have an advantage as it pertains to testosterone. Testosterone is a muscle-building, fat-burning hormone for men. Growth hormone is sort of a muscle-building, fat-burning hormone as well. Growth hormone is more fat-burning, less muscle-building. Testosterone is more muscle-building, a little less fat burning. But these are two what I call multitasking hormones in terms of they help us stay lean and help us build muscle. And there is some indication that women release a higher proportion of growth hormone in response to intense exercise and may have higher levels of growth hormone resting levels, relatively speaking, compared to men. And one of the things that I talk about is the idea that for women, workout programs that combine sort of medium weights with high repetitions and more of this burning effect, like CrossFit style workouts and metabolic conditioning type workouts, may be better workouts for them compared to these slow, heavy weight training workouts where they're, lifting heavy weights and things like that, but maybe a faster, higher rep, metabolic conditioning type stuff. Most women will do a little bit better than this because these are what I would consider growth hormone workouts. Now, all of this is kind of tricky to talk about hormones in this way, right? Because it doesn't necessarily work that way. But the idea here is that certainly when we work out, we have these hormonal effects, and women may have a benefit here, especially the combination of estrogen and human growth hormone. Anyone's interested in that particular science can go look at the metabolic renewal stuff. But I do get concerned here having these conversations because people hear these mechanisms which are, theoretical, really. We don't know. In order for us to really know, we'd have to take 100 men and 100 women and put them both on workout programs and test, what's happening with human growth hormone versus testosterone, and then look at, is that making a difference in their weight loss effects? And we simply don't have those studies. And so one of the things you need to understand when you're reading stuff like this is that much of it is theoretical, especially for people like me who have been doing this work for women for a long time, trying to figure out, why do these workouts seem to work better for women than sort of the traditional running approach or the traditional just standard weightlifting approach? Why do these sort of combination workouts seem to work better? Is it just simply because they burn more calories, or is there a hormonal advantage that might be happening? And so it's probably a combination of both. And I believe this growth hormone effect is having an effect here. But from my perspective, this question goes a little bit too far, right? They start asking about, well, does this mean women get more anti-aging effects and all of this? These are just questions we can't know. And does this mean it decreases women's risk for cancer and things like that? We can't answer any of those questions, but certainly both for men and women, workouts that enhance human growth hormone levels. Human growth hormone absolutely is an anti-aging hormone. It is going to help you stay leaner. It's going to help, there's indications that can help skin elasticity and skin quality. It is one of these things that declines as you age, so anything that you can do to continue to have a human growth hormone burst, it can help performance, it can help recovery, and all of those kinds of things. But we can't make any sort of claims as to whether this is decreasing, making women, age better than men. We can't say that. All we can say is, hey, if you're going to do the workouts that are going to release human growth hormone so you get some of its anti-aging effects. We also don't know to what extent human growth hormone is involved with cancer. Interestingly enough, there is debate here. Very high human growth hormone, because it is a growth hormone, may be bad for cancer. And certainly women are not at risk for cancers more than they are for certain cancers, but not all cancers, versus men. And so we don't want to be looking at this way. But certainly what I can say, my belief here is that one of the reasons why these workouts that combine weight training done with moderate weights that elicit sort of this, the B's and H's that I oftentimes talk about, breathless burning, heavy and heat, when you can get this simultaneous breathless burning, heavy and heat effect, what we see is that these style workouts give a higher push of human growth hormone, and that women may benefit from this very much, especially young women. The idea of estrogen and human growth hormones sort of socializing together as hormones to help burn fat and gain muscle in women may be one advantage that they have that men don't. But again, this is all, something that we would need to study. And so hopefully that gives you some of the nuances there and certainly tells you where that information came from, I hope. Okay, so next question here. If you wouldn't mind, Jade, giving your opinions about several supplements, I'd be grateful. I have taken ashwagandha and rhodiola for longer than I've used any of your programs, so I was relieved to see you do recommend them. Also, maca root. Do you think it's helpful for menopause and postmenopause? I'm going to stop there because she goes on here, but let's talk a little bit about rhodiola, ashwagandha, maca, and sort of the ginsengs and the adaptogens. I am a big fan of the adaptogens, very big fan. So for those of you who don't know what an adaptogen is, adaptogenic herbs are sort of unique. We really do not have adaptogenic substances in the conventional medical world, whereas we do in the natural medicine world. There are herbs such as the ginsengs, which are Panax ginseng, known as Asian ginseng, Siberian ginseng, known as Eleutherococcus. Maca is considered Peruvian ginseng. Ashwagandha is sort of, oftentimes called Indian ginseng, and rhodiola is another adaptogenic herb. And there are others, but what do adaptogenic herbs do? They seem to have a tonifying effect on the metabolism. Now, this word tonifying is not a good word. I do not like the word, but it's hard to come up with a better word. And tonifying essentially means that if function is too high, it seems to lower it. And if function is too low, it seems to regulate it. And this is especially true in the realm of some of the thermostat axes in the metabolism, such as the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and the hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis. These adaptogenic herbs seem to have a favorable effect on helping the hypothalamus stay sensitive to the surrounding inputs and be less sensitive to stress. And so it helps hear the environment better and helps resist stress a little bit better in the hypothalamus. And then these adaptogenic herbs will have downstream effects on the hypothalamus's communication with the pituitary, and then the communication to the thyroid, the adrenal, and the gonads, the testicles, and the ovaries. And these are, some of the core aspects of symptomology and things that we have to deal with when we're looking at people in a clinical practice. And these adaptogenic herbs do really, really well. For example, we know that ashwagandha has some very beneficial effects on the thyroid gland, as well as some beneficial effects on the hypothalamus in general. For example, that we know that people who deal with sort of this wired, tired physiology seem to do very well with ashwagandha, and it can calm them. Now, certainly I've seen in clinical practice that a small minority of people, it actually causes them to have, increased energy. But in general, ashwagandha is a calming adaptogen, whereas rhodiola has been studied and been shown to be highly effective for fatigue. And there may be some performance indicators for athletes as well with rhodiola. And so ashwagandha and rhodiola are two that I really like to use. Now, maca is really interesting here. And I just did sort of a review on maca, so I can share some of that review with you guys. But the question here is, do you think it's helpful for menopause? And maca is considered an adaptogen, and it is grown in Peru, and we call it Peruvian ginseng. It's not technically a ginseng, but we call it a ginseng just to kind of give it sort of its drawing attention to its sort of adaptogenic sort of nature. But absolutely, maca has been shown to be beneficial for menopause. There are studies showing that it can help decrease menopausal symptoms like hot flashes. It can help with libido increases for women who are in perimenopause and menopause. It has actually been shown for people in menopause, for women in menopause, to actually raise levels of estrogen and progesterone and have a direct hormonal effect. And again, it's working on this hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis. It has been shown in men to have some libido enhancing effects and some effects for mild erectile dysfunction, and it also has been responsive for good energy. And all the adaptogens seem to regulate energy in the body, again, probably through the hypothalamus pituitary axes. And so maca, one of the things to be aware of, though, with maca is there's many different sort of types of maca, different, different sort of species within the family of maca. So for example, with maca, we have maca is the technical name for maca is Lepidium peruvianum. That's the one that is typically studied. But there are many different types. Like there's another one called Lepidium mayayeni, and that is also called maca. And so when you kind of look at maca, you'll see there's different types of maca. There's red maca, there's green maca, there's all these different types of maca, and it is sometimes difficult to pin down which is doing which. I can tell you that Lepidium peruvianum is the one that is most studied when you go and look in the clinical research and is the one that has most of the effects. There is a company out there, and I'm trying to think of what the company is. I'm not going to remember the company, but I do know that they put out something called Feminescence, and it is called Maca Go, Maca Go, and Maca Go is interesting in the world of supplements because what this company has done, and I apologize, I don't remember the company's name, but what they have done is they have taken the different types of maca and combined them, paying attention to some of the different effects that have been seen in the research and some of the different effects that Peruvian herbal individuals have said that they use these things for. And I have seen very good effects with this particular product, Maca Go, and the one that is called Feminescence. I have used this with individuals, and it's the only maca I really use because I get more consistent effects. And basically, this Maca Go is really the one that I like to use for any of you who are going to be using maca. But, look, I don't know everything here, and there's probably some people listening to this who have a maca product they like. Certainly explore when it comes to supplements, but I do think maca in particular, especially for menopausal symptoms, is a really, really good one to look at. There's some decent research, and when I say decent, you have to understand that most of the research in the natural medicine world is not great, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It just means there's not as much money to study these things as there are for drugs, and there's not a whole lot of double-blind, placebo-controlled, good quality research on anything in the natural world. But certainly there is some research for maca, and it has been shown to do very well. And then, of course, clinical experience tells us many people in the functional medicine world love and use maca, especially in menopausal women. And so maca can be very beneficial there. This person also goes on to ask about, do you think collagen and bone broth is as helpful as some people say for symptoms of dry skin and hair that women may experience as their hormone levels diminish? Truth of the matter is, and I'll just give you my opinion here, and most of you know I'm one of these people that, I am biased towards I'll freely admit I am biased towards natural medicines and things like that, but I'm even more biased towards what's the research say, because I just think we need something other than just gurus and marketing to tell us. I mean, we need, some objective data. We don't always have that, and we certainly don't really have that right now for collagen and bone broth and things like that. However, it does make a good sense to try to incorporate these things into our lives and to eat these things. But I do think, yes, right now, at least, there's no big evidence base that says you're going to get any of these grand effects from collagen and bone broth. Do I think you need to spend extra money on these things? Probably not. Do I think that some people might see some benefits? Maybe. I certainly have not seen in clinical practice, people using these things and getting effects. And like most people, clinically, when you first start hearing about them and seeing some of the hype around them, you tend to get a little bit more like, oh, well, let me try that again. And truthfully, I've never seen them create much of an effect. So some people may be getting mad at me for that, but this is just based on my clinical experience and my reading of the research. There is new information, though, coming out on type 2 collagens and things like that, and having some beneficial effects possibly for things like joint pains and that kind of stuff. So I do think the jury's out, but I don't think that we need to be jumping on the bandwagons of these things, and there's many different ways to get this just through healthy eating and that kind of stuff. We talked about fasting a little bit before in this Q&A, and certainly bone broth works great with fasting simply because partly it gives you a lot of electrolytes and is sort of pleasant and gives you sort of that umami flavor to shut down hunger and things. And so bone broth, and it's very, very low in calories. You're typically getting 40 calories per 8 ounces of bone broth. And so it can be very useful, but certainly I wouldn't expect if you started taking collagen and drinking a bunch of bone broth that you're all of a sudden going to grow your hair back and all that kind of stuff. The final thing this person is asking is, there are doctors who advertise fat-blasting injections that seem to be vitamin B6 and vitamin B12, L-methionine, and inositol and choline. Do they help, and if so, how? And the answer to that is no, they do not help. These kinds of things, and again, I freely admit my bias towards natural medicine, but I also go and look in the research, and this is purely marketing. Fat blasting, the only way you're going to blast fat is to create a calorie deficit, get your hormones balanced. And by hormones, I mean the totality of hormones that control hunger and cravings and all that kind of stuff, so you can keep that calorie deficit. That's how you blast fat. You don't do it with some secret cocktail that you inject in yourself. And I wish I could say yes to that. Trust me. I mean, I really do. So I'm not saying it because I'm I'm pro-nutrient. I'm pro-natural medicine. That's what I studied. But let's be real here. This stuff is not going to blast fat off somebody. And anyone who says that, I think it's just something that you should look at with a raised eyebrow. These kinds of things are not helpful in the discourse on these things about what really works. Okay, so let's take one more question, and then I'm going to call it here. Hey, Jade, if I'm working up to the optimal amount of sleep, which supplements could I take to support recovery and minimize any drawbacks of getting less than optimal sleep? Okay, so this sounds like this is a person who's not getting optimal sleep and is trying to sleep better and wants to know if there's any supplements that can help. Well, first of all, again, I am pro natural medicine, pro supplements. I'm biased towards natural medicine. But again, I'm going to caution all of us here. Why do we jump on supplements? We have in the research many lifestyle factors that do way better than supplements. For example, 10 to 20 minute naps have been shown to reverse many of the hormonal changes that come with sleep deprivation. So on days where you don't sleep well, a 10-minute nap has been shown to be highly effective. The other thing that's great about a 10-minute nap is that it is not long enough to get too deep into the sleep cycle. And so what happens is you go into a very light sleep. Sometimes you don't even think you're sleeping, and it can be highly restorative. Meditation can do the same thing. And so I would be looking at those things first. When you don't get a good night's sleep, I oftentimes talk about this Plan B nutrition. Understand that when you do not sleep well, you are automatically waking up with higher amounts of stress hormones, and you are far more insulin resistant just from not sleeping. And so you have to be very careful with how you eat. Also, we talked a lot about different stresses, and so you want to have a plan B. Let's say you are someone who eats one particular way on days where you sleep well, but you also know that you're extra hungry, you're extra groggy, you're extra sensitive to stress on days you didn't get a good night's sleep. And on those days, you tend to eat more frequently, or you use other things. You eat more protein powders or convenience-based foods to control hunger and cravings. These are the kind of plans that you want into effect here. Now, in terms of supplements, the simple ones work really well. There's a supplement called magnesium glycinate or glycinate. This is magnesium chelated to the amino acid glycine. And just for those of you who know, brief biochemistry lesson here, an amino acid chelate, I believe, is the Greek word for claw. And so essentially when you see something like magnesium glycinate or glycinate or magnesium citrate or magnesium malate, essentially this is taking an organic acid or an amino acid or an organic compound and attaching it to magnesium so that the magnesium is better absorbed into the body. And one of the best absorbed forms of magnesium is magnesium glycinate or glycinate. Not only that, glycine, the amino acid glycine, can be very calming in the body. So 300 to 600 milligrams of magnesium glycinate is a very nice way to help relax people at the end of the night to sleep. You can also get your magnesium through Epsom salt baths, which are really nice as well. One of the things that many people don't know is that when the body gets ready for sleep, the temperature, your body temperature drops, and that's a signal for you to get sort of groggy and sleepy. A hot shower or a hot bath at the end of the day, think about what happens when you come out of a hot bath or a hot shower. You step out of the shower, all your blood vessels are open and dilated, so you give off heat more quickly, and your body cools down very quickly. A lot of people don't realize this. If you want to conserve heat and be warmer when you get out of the shower, you want to blast yourself with cold, which constricts all the blood vessels so that when you step out, you retain heat better. Now, if you want to cool your body down faster, what you do is you go hot water, step out, and what happens is you start dissipating heat really quickly. Your temperature starts to drop, and that can make you sleepy. So oftentimes doing a warm shower before is really good. Also, orgasm is not a well-appreciated mechanism to help us sleep. Orgasm is a very relaxing thing. So masturbating to orgasm or having sex with a partner inducing orgasm is one of the best ways to help induce sleep as well and to relax the body. Also, making sure that your blood sugar levels are balanced. Many times people have low blood sugar levels will fall. That will stimulate stress hormone production to raise the blood sugar back up, and that can cause this sort of wired sort of feeling that you get. Sometimes people, they're like, I was tired at 8, but then I got a second wind at 10 or 11. This oftentimes means the blood sugar levels dropped. Maybe you ate your last meal at 7, now you're going to bed at 11, and you're getting this sort of blood sugar, this adrenaline response. And oftentimes eating a small snack before bed, like maybe with a little bit of carbohydrate and a little bit of fat, can help keep that from happening. Typically, if you want to make sort of your blood sugar stable at night, protein and fat will typically do that well. And so those are all the things you can do. Another one that I really like that's a really good over-the-counter is Yogi brand teas has one called bedtime tea. And it uses skullcap and valerian and some other things in there that are GABA-like, GABAergic type of herbs. Well, Xanax is very relaxing. Many people will take a Xanax to go to sleep and calm them. That's because Xanax works on GABA, G-A-B-A, the number one relaxing neurotransmitter in the brain. Well, these GABAergic herbs can act like weak Xanax and can be very beneficial. So taking magnesium glycinate, 300 to 600 milligrams, and doing this yogi bedtime tea, you want to do a pretty strong tea, 2 to 4 tea bags in, sort of a cup of hot water before bed can really help with sleep as well. Many people will take melatonin and things like that. I've had mixed results on that, but melatonin can work for some individuals. And so hopefully that gives you some, sort of help with sleep and some of the supplements that you can take around sleep. Okay, guys, so I'm going to end right there. Just been talking for a while, so I will see you at the next Q&A podcast, but I hope this is helpful for you.